Well, as you study through the Bible, some parts of it have a very powerful devotional aspect to it. And then some parts of it, because it is a history book, are simply having to tell you the history, especially important points that are going to be very important in later stories. And this is why Paul told Timothy to make sure you continue with the public reading of Scripture. Interesting, there was a group called the Moravians, and there was a time before the Wesley Revival that they powerfully moved Europe and America. But all these guys believed in doing was just reading the Bible. And that's actually where John Wesley got saved. They were out in the streets of England just reading the book of Romans. And as he stood and listened to it, he understood he was saved by faith alone and the grace of God alone. And so sometimes just giving yourself to the public reading of Scripture is an obedient thing, and it's a powerful thing. And of course, Holy Spirit is always speaking, line upon line, precept upon precept. But we also, I think, are always seeing on every dot and tittle of the Bible the nature of God. And God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So what God loved, he will always love. What God hated, he'll always hate. What God said is truth or sin is always truth or sin. There's not an evolution in truth. God cannot grow. God cannot improve. Truth cannot change or grow or improve. And so we always want to be conscious as we're studying through the Bible to say, Lord, reveal yourself to me. And so we had just saw Jacob deceive his father, get all the blessings from Isaac on, he thought his son Esau, but it was actually on Jacob. Esau comes in and says, well, at least give me the blessing that you're going to give Jacob. And we realize how badly the family was split when Isaac said, I didn't leave anything for your brother Jacob. I was giving it all to you, which was wrong. But remember his mother, Rebekah, Jacob's mother, had said, hey, your dad's going to not give you anything. Go in there and act like your brother and put these lambskin on and change your voice and just put on your A game of being a deceiver and make sure you get out of there with that blessing. And of course, he didn't need to do any of that because God had said before they had even been born that he had chose the younger over the older. So had Isaac tried to put his blessing on Esau, probably an angel would have showed up and stood in between them and go, we remember how God opened the donkey's mouth of Balaam to set him straight. So, it's infinite what God can do. God didn't need Jacob's ways of the flesh to perfect what God was doing by his Spirit. So Jacob's brother is going to kill him. Rebekah says, flee. He flees for his life. He gets to this very desolate, random place. God gives him a dream of a ladder, angels ascending and descending, which we saw was a prophecy of Christ. And Jesus actually told Nathanael that in the Gospel of John, that it was actually a prophecy of the Son of Man ascending and descending, or descending and ascending. And Jacob wakes up and he's just overcome that God's presence is in this place. I thought there was no presence in this place, but death and dryness and dirt. And I just thought I picked some random spot, but that random spot happened to be where God is always at. God's everywhere. And Jacob realized he's trying to put it together. I think I stumbled in some door of the house of God or whatever, but he's gonna learn. These guys knew very little about God at this point. And so he's going to learn that God is very aware of Jacob and that he is God's called, elected, and that God is very much with him. And again, we just see grace because Jacob was in a very low place. He just completely deceived his dad. his brother wants to kill him. His mother, all she had was these Canaanite daughters of Esau that grieved her. Jacob was her only friend, and he's gone now. They're separated. So the loss of his mother, the grief he caused his dad, the brother hating him, and now he's going to go to some random place. His mother says, you got to go to my brother Laban's house in Haran. And he's just wandering, heading east, and it wasn't like there's a bunch of road signs and, city population is and elevation is, and, he's just wandering out in the desert. And but now he realizes God's with me. God's here. God's promised that he's going to be my God. And we see him declaring that since God's going to be with him and God's going to feed him and clothe him, and he says, I'm going to make the Lord my God. And then he set up a stone, poured oil on it, worshiped, and then he gave a tithe of all. And so we come into chapter 29 now. So Jacob is on his way to his uncle Laban's house. And on his journey, he came to the land of the people of the east. So he's going from desolation and starting to see some people. And he looked and he saw a well in the field. So, hey, I'm thirsty out in the middle of the desert. Hey, there's some water. And behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. And so when you think of a well in the desert, and I've seen them in Israel, it is really a hole. And that's all it is. I mean, you wouldn't even know it was a well unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. And so all it is just picture a hole in the ground, and there's a rock sitting on it, so you wouldn't have known it, but somehow they knew that was a well. And he realizes, there's people sitting around waiting. What are they waiting for? They're waiting for some guys to get together to move this giant rock. It was going to have to be a team effort. And in verse 3 there, and all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. This must have just completely blown Jacob away. Because that's what he was looking for. Laban of Haran. And he's just stumbling along and he finally gets east. And there, the first people he talked to said, you're home. You've arrived. You're here. And he's just completely blown away. I'd just like to stop and just tell a couple of quick stories here. And I know that we all have that similar experience of just divine appointments where you know God is working if you'll tune in. He's got all kinds of good works that you should walk in them if you're conscious of it. I remember some years back I was speaking at a men's retreat out in the middle of Idaho and flew into Boise and went to Napa and spoke at a church there. And the pastor was in the front, and one of our elders was with him in this van that was closed off. You know those kind of vans? It had a little window, but it had curtains on it. I couldn't see out. But it had a nice sofa in the back and a table, and I thought, this is great. I can just review my notes. And I was cruising along and just studying, and I couldn't really see out. I could see out the front window a little bit. And we're just out in the middle of nowhere in Idaho. I mean, hardly a house ever, but just farmland. And I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, I just had this overwhelming sense we had to stop. And I told them, I said, hey, stop, guys, right here. And they thought I was car sick because I'm sitting in the back of this van. And so they slam on the brake and pull over. And it was a miracle. We actually pulled in front of a farmhouse. And I open the door, I jump out, and down from this farmhouse comes this lady. Her name was Debbie, who had been in our church years earlier. Her husband had wrongfully, sinfully divorced her. She moved, and I knew it was somewhere, and I realized it was Idaho. And she was just in a very difficult season of her life, and just asking God to help her and give her direction and let her know that he's hearing her and with her. And all of a sudden, this van pulls up and stops in front of her house, and there's Pastor Bryan, And she's, Bryan. I'm like, Debbie. He's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And we walked around the farm and had a wonderful conversation for about 45 minutes, and off we went. It's just a neat thing. Back before the church started, right after the church had first started, we had a missionary in Mexico, Tijuana here, that we were supporting, and at the time we were going to Mexico. It was right before the church started, and we went right into Mexico City. I was doing an evangelistic crusade, and the missionary went with us, and he said, hey, while we're in Mexico City, you got to realize it literally is the world's largest city. He said, I have a picture of this guy who's in my church. As far as his family knows, he's dead. Okay, this is in the early 80s. And he was a full drug addict and going to go to America. And, he was told that if he swept one city block anywhere in America, he would have enough money to retire on. Anyway, and so, hey, if we get a day off, let's go try to find this guy's family and tell him what God has done in his life. And so we have a day off, and we're trying to get to this area of town where he originally was from, called Netza, which means there's only 20 million people, And it is just a large area. I mean, a gigantic area. So we're trying just to get there. You got to get from one part of Mexico City to another is just nearly impossible. And we're standing there we went from a bus and walked, and we're trying to get onto the subway, and all of a sudden, everybody starts coming out. It's like a sea of people. It was the most unbelievable amount of people coming at us I've ever can imagine. And we just kept walking, and they're telling us, hey, don't even bother going. And we get to the subway, which had been shut down. And as soon as we get to the subway, it starts working. And we're like by ourselves on a subway heading to the next stop, which normally you just sardine. It takes an hour or so to even get on. But anyway, we get to this place called Netza. We get out of the subway, and we're just standing looking at a sea of buildings and houses, and we're asking people, where's Netza? They're like, you're here. You're here for the next hour, every which direction you walk, you're here. And he knew his family was no longer living in Netza, but that was the last place he knew they were living. So the family's not even here in this area, but this is the last indicator we had. So we just start praying, and we had been praying all day, and we're just praying and walking and praying down this road, down that road, probably a half an hour or more. We finally go down this one road, and there's this little girl, probably 8 years old, sort of playing on her front porch area. And we ask her, we're like, hey, do you know this guy here? And she looked at it, she goes, I can't talk to strangers. She goes in her house, her mom comes out, yelling at us, what are you gringos doing talking to my daughter? And I was like, sorry, do you know this guy? She grabbed the picture and she says, that's my brother. We thought he was dead. And we said, no, he's not dead, but we'd love to tell you about him. She goes, hold it. It just so happens our entire family has not gotten together in years, but we are today. My entire family from all over Mexico is getting together, and it's about an hour and a half away, but if you come back here in an hour, I will drive you there, and you can tell everybody your story. So we go to the park, played some basketball, came back in about an hour, And sure enough, we drove and drove and drove, and we ended up getting to this place, and all this family's there, and we just start preaching the gospel. And the issue was, though, is I was pretty much in charge of one aspect of the crusade that we were doing, and it was at this giant arena, and I was supposed to be there at 6 o'clock, and we're looking down, and it's like 5 till 6. And you got to realize, to get across the street in Mexico City takes an hour. And I'm just like, what are we going to do? And they heard us talking, like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I got to get to this place right now. And they're like, what place? And we told them again. And the guy says, come here. And we walk outside, and he points category across the street. There was the building. We were on time. That was the miracle I was trying to get to. We were on time in Mexico. That was all I was trying to say. No, it just, those kind of things when they happen, it's just overwhelming. Knowing that God is with us in ways that we don't even calculate. I mean, how many times we could have died or should have died, and we were unaware of it even being a possible tragedy. And here I just have a sense of what Jacob is just walking. He's seeing some people. He finally stops at a well to get a water and says, hey, by the way, where are you guys from? And they are from the very place he needs to be. And in verse 5, he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. Now, you never know the inflection in voice. I think it was probably like they looked at each other and their eyes crossed, and they're like, yeah, we know him. We know Laban. Yeah, we know him. Yeah. Wish we didn't know him, but yeah, we know him. And he said to them, is he well? And they said, yeah, he's well. He's cheated me out of money 10 different times, but yeah, he's well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. I mean, this is just getting overwhelming to him. And he said, look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together, water the sheep, and go feed them. So everybody's here hours before they should be here. This is unusual that they're coming at a time they normally would never come. But somehow they are getting stirred up to do the watering of these sheep hours earlier than they normally would. And then he said, look, it is still high noon. And in verse 8, but they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. So we got to wait till we get enough guys together to move that giant boulder. And while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth by himself and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Now, remember back in chapter 28, his mother said, you're going to go to my brother Laban and you're going to marry one of his daughters. And he's there going, oh, this is possibly one of my potential brides here, you know. And he sees her and he's like, whoa, she is beautiful. And as guys like to do, show off for the future girl there, he just muscles this thing and moves it himself. And then interesting that 80 years earlier, when Abraham sent his servant to go find the wife for his son Isaac, when his priest was coming to this same place, when Abraham's servant was coming to this same place, he's like, Lord, lead me. Lead me. Who would be the right woman? And out of all the women, this woman, Rebecca, steps forward and says, let me water all your camels. We're talking 40 gallons a camel, and it would have been horrendous, but she did it. And the Lord said, this is the woman, this servant woman. Here we are now, 80 years later or more, and her son is very much walking in his mother's footsteps. And not watering a bunch of camels, but watering all the sheep that are there, being a servant, like his mother Rebecca, and in essence, through being that servant, revealing himself as the future husband of this lady. Interesting. Well, Jacob went near and rolled the stone and watered the flocks. And then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Man, Jacob had been carrying a burden for a very long time. He wasn't comfortable at home. Esau was ready to kill him. Dad was looking at him with a frown. Mom's stressed out over all these wives of Esau. He's finally fleeing for his life. He's just exhausted, lays down on this rock, falls asleep. God gives him this vision. He's like, man, and then he's walking hundreds of miles, and he finally gets to this place. The first time he talks to somebody, it's just so many radical ups and downs, and then he sees this girl, and he realizes this is my cousin, and God's brought me here, and look at how this whole divine appointment, how God's arranged this whole thing, and he just has a meltdown, man. He's just like, I'm home, I'm at rest, God's blessing me, even though I'm such a schmuck. You know, God's hand is just all over my life, blessing me, and he's going from being this attractive guy to this guy who's, you know, snorting snot and crying all over her, and she's like, you know, do I know you? And Jacob then told her in verse 12 to Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. So he's crying and can't get the words out, and this whole emotional thing's going on, and he finally is like, yeah, I'm your cousin, and she understood what all that meant. So she runs to her dad. And it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him into his house. And he told Laban all these things. Now, remember, the last time somebody from the clan of Abraham had showed up, Abraham's servant, and he decided he wanted Laban's sister, Rebekah. Laban's like, no, don't leave us. Stay here, Rebekah. And this servant just starts laying all kinds of gold and jewels and tremendous wealth that Abraham had to give them the dowry. And we're going to find out that one thing Laban likes a lot is money. So now he's like, hey, our rich relatives are here. Woohoo, you know. Yeah, you know, I'm going to treat you good. Come on in. What kind of stash of gold and silver and jewels do you have for us this time from a foreign land? And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Now, it just so happens, because of the history in the last decade or more, we know where this place is. Picture, if you would, a map of Iraq. And the largest city in Iraq is Baghdad, right? And if you were to go south of Baghdad down, you'll come to a place called Nazareth. That is the Ur of the Chaldees. That is the ancient site of Babylon. And that is the place Abraham was born and raised. And that is where he is right now. It's right between the Tigris and Euphrates River, which the Garden of Eden was there. And even to this day, it's called the fertilization of civilization. It's where most of the world believes that it all started from the human race, from Adam and Eve and so forth. There's a great little book called Eternity in the Heart. And this guy, he was a missionary. He went throughout the world, and he realized that every people, no matter how small the tribe out in the middle of New Guinea is, they all have a very similar story of God creator, different versions of it, I grant, But God created a worldwide flood, but they also have the beginning of a man and a woman. And it's a very similar story. And so most of the world to this day has that tradition. And so this is where Jacob is now landed. And he's there with them for a month. He's on vacation. They're treating him like royalty. But Laban said to Jacob, it looks like you're sticking around here, so we got to readjust. You're staying here. Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? So you're here, you're working for a month, we're feeding you, and you got a place to stay, and you're sort of on a vacation here, but it looks like you're going to stay here, and I can't treat you like a slave. You're my relative. I can't treat you this way, so I need to be paying you. This is what's right. So tell me, what should the wages be? What's a guy like you think, from where you come from and how your brain works and what you think you're worth? What are you thinking? And Laban had 2 daughters, and the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel's were beautiful of form and appearance. Now, remember, guys, in this culture, women were covered. And so, basically, most of what you're seeing is eyes. And, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I just, as we're reading these stories, especially in Genesis, we just got to realize that there's just humanness here, okay? And God is just saying, these guys I was working with, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, their wives, their kids, they're very human, just like you. They had desires like you. They have struggles like you. They weren't some different brand or race of people with a different desires and appetites and different view on money, and they had cultural differences, but very much what they struggled with, you struggle with today. What you are desiring, they also desired. And I can tell you, interesting, having traveled a good part of the world and having lived in different places, it's interesting how people view beauty. And it's very, very different. I remember moving in high school to a little tiny farming community in Central California. And literally 70% of all the guys named there were Eugene. And it sounds like, Eugene, what are you talking about? It was a very cool name. Had I stayed living there, I probably would have named my kid Eugene. It was an overwhelming force of coolness. And interesting, when I went to the high school there, the girls that were like the most popular girls and most beautiful, I didn't find attractive at all. I'm like, how is it that everybody except me sees this girl as like the most beautiful girl in the school, the most popular girl in the school? But I'll tell you what, after living there a couple of years, I got it. That form of face, that type of person did become very attractive to me. And I realized I've been moved in what I thought was attractive by others and how they treated this person and how they kept reinforcing what beauty was. It changed my mind. And going to Europe, I mean, it's very interesting how, Russians or, people from the UK or different parts of the world, what they find as attractive, just facial structure, types of various looks that, we're all talking about. And it is very sociologically very, very interesting. So at this time, Leah might have been like the most beautiful girl to us, but it wasn't to them over there at that time. And what they saw in the eyes, there was something that was less beautiful in the eyes, but yet with Rachel, there was a sparkle, there was something that was beautiful. So the idea was, if you were to pull down the veil, you would think the rest of the face is much more prettier also. But for whatever reason, that was the way people thought about her, and that's the way Jacob thought about her as well, that she wasn't as attractive as her sister Rachel. And Jacob, in verse 18, loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. Room and board, and I'm putting money in the bank for a dowry for your younger daughter, Rachel. And Laban said, it is better that I give it to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So in the Arab culture today, not all Arab cultures, but most of the Arab cultures today, they still prefer to marry their first cousin. Several years back, I had met some guys. We were going to the Promise Keepers prayer thing in Washington, D.C., and I was with a group of Arab guys that were Iranians, and they were Iranian Catholics, and we were hooked up in a group, and we were talking, and they were all married to their first cousins or in a agreement with their parents that they were going to marry their cousins that were still in Iran at that time. And they asked me about that, saying, what do you think about marrying your first cousin? And I was like, I know it's not legal everywhere in every state. And so I actually looked into it. In California, it is legal to marry your first cousin. But not every state is it legal in the United States. But he's like, what do you think about that? And I'm like, for me personally, yuck. But, in their mind, in keeping a pure race and keeping a family bond of connection, it's a very important thing. Well, anyway, so hey, this makes total sense, and this was a tremendous dowry. So it was sort of hard for Laban to say, "Wow, you're underpaying me. You're way overpaying me." So yeah, that's a great win-win deal. It's done. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. This is a great story when you're talking to single people. That lust cannot wait, but love, true love, one of the indicators of true love is it's patient. Love is patient. And he was attracted to her, but it wasn't a momentary, I want you, I want your body, I want you, it was, hey, I love you, I respect you, I desire you for a lifetime. And that's the commitment I'm making. And so you got to remember here, Jacob is 77 years old. We covered that last week. So it's not like he's a young pup. So he was 84 years old before he got his first honeymoon night. And so here, he waited. And he... in this culture, they wouldn't have a lot of connection. Men and women were very much separated. So his interaction with her would have been very supervised, very limited, but yet he cared so much. It was a genuine love. It didn't matter what it was going to take. And so Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening, so the wedding keeps going and going until the night falls. He took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. So you got to remember, they were covered. It's dark out. I'm sure that, the normal candles or lights that were around, Laban snuffed them out. And, he arranged it, even though it's hard to imagine this happened. I'm sure that Laban, had it figured out, plotted in ahead of time how he was going to make this change. And he did. And Laban gave his, and his daughter brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said, Laban! And he ran out of the tent, grabbed him by the nape of the neck, and said, what is this you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel I served you? Why then have you deceived me? Ooh, why have you deceived me? Do you remember where we saw that earlier in Genesis? In the last chapter, Isaac said that to Jacob. Why did you deceive me? And now Jacob, 7 years later, is saying it to his father-in-law. And notice what Laban said. Well, oy vey, I thought you knew. It's not done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Ouch. Jacob, do you have a hard time with me deceiving you, giving the right place for the older child over the younger child? Is that a sore issue with you, Jacob? Do you see the parallels here? It's fascinating. Jacob didn't want to honor the older brother's Esau right to the blessing. He snaked it out to say no. And now he's fleeing for his life over the very issue of the older and the younger. Now, did Laban consciously try to make Jacob bleed over this issue? I don't think so. I don't think Laban probably knew completely what Jacob had done. But yet he was possessed to do this. Why? We know. What you sow is what? What you reap. We find this continuously through the Bible. I think one of the more powerful points on this comes in the first chapter of Judges. Joshua and the gang are going in to take out the promised land. And they come to the land of the Canaanites, and they get in this battle with this guy, Adonai-Bezek. And they're fighting with this guy, and they win the battle, and they did something strange. For some reason, they felt possessed to cut off his thumbs and his toes. And he's laying there, thumbless and toeless. And he said, you guys are talking amongst yourself why you felt like you needed to do that to me. I've done that to 70 other kings. Every king I fought, 70 of them, I've won. I've done that to every one. And then he says in Judges 1:7, so God has now done to me as I have done to them. He knew it. I'm reaping what I sowed. And it was a powerful statement to all of these guys who had done this, probably subconsciously, unaware that God was moving this course of action because God was, in essence, saying, not everything do we reap what we sow. Some things we reap what we sow before death. Some things we'll reap what we sow after death. It tells us that in 1 Timothy 5. God doesn't always complete the circle. Not every Hitler gets killed, Not every murderer gets caught. Not every thief gets punished. It's sometimes we're amazed that people get away with things all the way to death. But in Psalm 73, he said, I almost stumbled and fell over this issue until I realized when I went into the temple and I realized life's eternal. God has all of eternity to cause everybody to reap what they've sown. But sometimes we see it to be reminded that this is happening, whether it's on earth or in eternity, it's going on. And so he basically, I'm sure that Jacob sensed the presence of God and got it. Wow, this is so similar. You out-Jacobed me, Laban. And Jacob's going to find that Laban is Jacob, 50 years later, on steroids. Jacob is going to be outwitted by Jacob. And sometimes that's what God does to uproot some nasty things in you. He just sort of drowns you in that characteristic in a different situation until you see it in yourself and you're like, I'm so grossed out by that manipulative part of my life, or that lustful part of my life, or that greedy part of my life. I'm drowning in it from this other situation. I never want to be that way again. And in essence, that's what God is sort of drowning Jacob in his own nature through Laban, and to wake him up to this point. So then he said in verse 27, fulfill her week. The word week is sevens. It's a group of sevens. It can be 7 days, 7 years. In this case, in context, it's 7 years. So fulfill her 7, and we will give you this one also for the service which you have served with me till another 7, group of 7 years, is fulfilled. So I'm going to go ahead and give the younger to you right now, but you understand you have another 7 years to work for me. So Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel, his wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as maid. And Jacob also went to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban till another 7 years. And when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, which means a son. For she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon, which means heard. God heard me. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name is called Levi, which means attached. I'm gonna finally get that companionship and love and admiration and focus and from my husband, now that I've given him 3 sons. But she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, which means to praise. Then she stopped bearing. So it seems like she went through these years of craving and desiring, and she finally realized, Jacob got stuck with me through my dad deceiving, and he has never gotten over it, probably never will get over it. It was not attracted to me to begin with, and now he's sort of stuck with me. He is fulfilling his duty as a husband sexually, but that's it. There isn't a love there. There's just sex. And she finally just gets her eyes on the Lord and just said, you know what? My husband's not going to fulfill me. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a fulfillment with God fulfilling my life. And this is exactly what we see here, that God did take notice of her. It tells us there that in verse 31, the Lord saw that Leah was unloved. Guys, it's just an important point to realize God does know. God is observing, right down to every hair on your head. We're gonna see in this story that humanly, everybody was miserable, sort of like we are today in a lot of ways. Leah was miserable because she wanted this thing she had imagined, and this companionship and this love and this joyful relationship with her husband, which she never got. Rachel got all of that, but it didn't matter because she couldn't have kids and she was barren, and she was just wanting to die over that. Jacob is Jacob, and he's hurting over the fact that he's such a Jacob, and he's away from his family, and he's with this schnook Laban that has complete control over his life for another 7 years. And so you have this looking on this family, and all 3 people in this relationship are beyond miserable. But yet God is noticing and saying, you know what? I'm working. God does turn everything around for good. to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And that doesn't mean on a human level that life is less painless. A lot of times people will sort of preach the gospel saying, come to Christ and life will be less painless. Come to Christ and you'll see a greater prosperity. In essence, they're saying, come to Christ and the humanness of this human world will affect you less. And that is a lie. Okay? A 16-year-old Christian girl, a 16-year-old atheist girl, a Christian, a 16-year-old Mormon girl, whatever. 16-year-olds experience what 16-year-olds experience because they're 16 years old. It's just on a human level of cycles, of growth, of maturity, of life experiences. In the same culture, it's very similar. And to say that God intervenes to such a degree in humanity that we don't experience the difficulties and the struggles and the pains of humanity is a lie that Satan would love to propagate, saying Christianity doesn't work. Because look at the non-Christian. They're going through the same cycles of difficulties of marriage as the Christian is. So why be a Christian? It's hard to be a Christian. Why it's not improving your marriage any more than the non-Christian. And actually it is improving greatly because the Holy Spirit's in you and in them. But that doesn't mean you don't struggle with the same issues in communication with parents and kids and finances and just growing older and changing and the lows and the highs of life. Right? And this is what we see, and this is why it's such an important thing to understand. The Bible is a historical book, and it is telling us historically his story, God's story in the midst of humanity. So we don't see humanity improving. We just see God in the midst of our humanity. So Leah got stuck with Jacob. Jacob got stuck with Leah. Rachel got stuck with her sister in her marriage. And Laban's and, their dad's still in control of their husband and them. And it's just this giant mess. And God's just going, I'm there. I'm there. Leah, I see you. And you know what? I can do something to a degree. I can do something to ease your burden. Here's 4 sons. But in chapter 30, but with Rachel, she saw that she bore Jacob no children, and Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. So she is just at a complete breaking point emotionally. The disgrace of being barren in this culture is just beyond what she can handle. She is suicidal. She's like, you know what? Either I have children, I'd rather die. I can't keep living in this disgraced life on earth. Now again, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if you remember, Abraham and Sarah had a hard time having kids until Isaac. Then we saw Isaac, and remember with Rebekah. He prays and cries out to God, and he just labors in prayer, and then his wife gets pregnant when it didn't seem like it was going to happen. And now Jacob, the wife that he loves, and the one that was the chosen wife for him, in who the line predominantly, we're going to see most of the book of Genesis is about that one person, Joseph, is going to come from Rachel's firstborn. But anyway, so she's just like, man, I am at the end of myself here. And Jacob gets angry with her. He's just trying to love her and show Leah no love, to just let Rachel know all his love's for her. And Leah's getting the raw end of the deal. He's trying to so focus on his wife to let her know that her being barren isn't an issue with him. His love for her just as great, but it's not helping. And he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Aye. Boy, people closest to you can hurt you the worst, huh? And she said, well, here's my maid Bilhah. Go into her. Man, does this sound familiar? This is what Sarah did with Hagar and the whole mess with Ishmael. Well, here you go. Here you have a child through my maid, and they would bear the child. The woman of the home, in this case Rachel, would deliver the child and put the child in her lap, signifying in this culture that the baby's from her. Even though the maid had her, it's her child. This is the way the culture looked at it. So she was to bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. Then she gave her Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went to her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob's son. And Rachel said, God has judged my case. He has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan, which means to judge. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with great wrestlings I've wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. So man, are these guys at each other's throats or what? So she has, Leah has 4 sons from her. Rachel now has 2 sons through her maid and says, I win. Really? I mean, shouldn't you say that until you have 4, or 5, and then say, hey, I have 5, But Leah, when she's like, oh, okay, I didn't know this was a competition, pull the sleeves up. So she started going in, and she took Zillah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob. And Leah's maid Zillah bore Jacob's son, and Leah said, a troop, or probably better translated, a fortune. Zillah, the Zilpah gal, she is just a baby-making machine. Whoa, number 1's coming out. I'm gonna sink you, Rachel. So she called his name Gad, which means the fortune, or the troop. This is the first of many, an army's coming from this one. She just pumps those babies out. So Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Happy, Asher. Now Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to her mother Leah. And Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes, which they believed had powers for fertilization and stuff. It was a yellow flower that had a little fruit on it, and this was a mythical thing. But he's in essence saying, "Hey, Mom, here's a pretty flower." And she said, "Whoa, yeah, that's going to help me have more kids or something." And so she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" And Rachel said, "Well, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrake. So I'll give you one of my nights that you sleep with him for the mandrakes." Isn't that pimping your husband out? I don't know. This is just getting bizarre, man. And when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went up to meet him and said, "You must come to me tonight, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he's like, "Yeah, okay, sure. Sounds good." And so he laid with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. And Leah said, "God has given me wages because I have given my maid to the husband." So she called his name Issachar, which is wages. And Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun, which is dwelling. Afterwards she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. And God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Now, I'm sure she had other daughters as well, but as we read these stories, they only mention the ones that are going to become historical importance in a later story. So Dinah is going to come up in a later story. This is why you need to know about her in this lineage, if you would. So she conceived and bore a son, and God said, "Taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph. So here we finally get it. "And the Lord shall add to me another son." And so now she has a child. She'll have one more later, Benjamin. But it came to pass when Rachel had bore Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me wives and my children from whom I have served you, and let me go, and you'll know my service which I have done for you." So I've done the 14 years, I paid up, I'm out of here. And Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I found favor in your eyes. I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Laban sees it. Interesting, we keep seeing this, huh? Remember Abimelech saw that in Abraham, and the next Abimelech saw that in Isaac. It's like, wherever you are, blessings are. So I want to be on your good side. And Laban is like, I've never been this successful. I'm the most successful guy around here. And I know why. Because you're the elect of God, God's blessings on you, and I want to be a part of that. And so he said, name your wages. Now, just quickly in this story, it's rather intricate. But Jacob thinks he has this system by putting stakes and ripping part of the stake off and putting stripes on them and putting them down by the water and so forth, where he can manipulate whether the sheep has spots or is black or brown or white. So whatever sheep Laban wants, first he wants all the white and black ones. All the strong sheep are speckled and brown. And so Laban says, let's change that up. You can have all the white and black ones. And then all the strong ones are now white and black. And Laban says, let's change back. And he keeps doing this, and Jacob is always coming out on top. Infuriating Laban. And I really don't know if it had anything to do with anything. I think it was just God's blessing. But it came to pass there at the very end, in verse 43, so thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had a large flock and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. And then we're going to hear about Jacob and Laban being very angry with Jacob, and now Jacob fleeing for his life, running back now to Esau, who used to want to kill him 20 years earlier. So 20 years later, Jacob left Esau, who was on his way to kill him, and it's Laban, and now after 20 years with Laban wants to kill him, and he's ricocheting back over to Esau, wondering if Esau's wanting to kill him. So we're going to find out next week that Jacob's between two groups of guys that want to kill him. And there the Lord wrestles with him, and he wrestles with the Lord. And there's some deep spiritual work. When you're between a rock and a hard place, God has a powerful work to do in you. Well, Lord, thank you for your word tonight. And we just ask that as we continue to go line upon line, precept upon precept, that you would just continue to speak it deeper and deeper into our lives. Bless the time of fellowship now, and continue to put your blessings upon Calvary Chapel San Diego, that we could be the light and the salt of the earth in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. If you need prayer, come on up. I'd love to pray with you. God bless.